Joel. Welcome back to the Invisible Path, man.
Thanks for having me, Patrick. Yeah, man.
No, thanks for having me.
I think it's your topic this week.
Yeah,
But hey,
yeah.
man, nice shirt you got there.
I appreciate that,
I
man.
like that. Yeah.
I appreciate that. Yeah, so we're gonna get into what I think is gonna be a fun topic: swimming upstream and critical thinking. Why it's maybe worth it to swim against the current. But before we do that, I want to jump into we have a single question this week, and it's kind of a fun one. Coming in from Paul. It says, I listened to you two talk about the feeling of picking up an album, and it made me think back. My first album was Jagged Little Pill. I think that was Alanis Morissette. That's my subtext there. Do you guys know what your first album purchase was?
You want to go first, or you want me
I'll
to
go
go
first because
first?
I was like cycling through and I know the answer, and my answer is so perfectly embarrassing that I love it. The very first album I ever purchased was Weird Al Yankovic, and it was the album where he covered Nirvana Nevermind. Now
That's
I purchased a
hilarious.
parody album. That was the first music
Yeah.
purchase I ever made.
Yeah. So I think for me, well, I was buying tapes. I was buying tapes before I was buying albums, but eventually I did get into albums. The first album I got was from the Police, and I remember discovering after I brought it home that it was printed on, I think they call it virgin vinyl or something, but you hold the record up to the light and it looks black, but you hold it up to the light and it's this amber color.
Ooh.
If you have a light bulb right in front of it, it was beautiful. And
Huh.
there's something to that, but I really like the the gatefold albums, Led Zeppelin, Physical Graffiti, albums that have holes in them that are like punched out, and then the sleeve is printed, and then there's an interaction there. So yeah, Led Zeppelin, Physical Graffiti, Rolling Stones, Some Girls. That's another one that has a great interaction there. And then if you can get Sticky Fingers, Rolling Stones, Sticky Fingers, with that, it has a cover designed by Andy Warhol, and it has a zipper on the front of it. It has like a picture of basically men's jeans, a man's kind of crotch region with a zipper on it, and then the sleeve on the inside. Yeah, it's been a long time. I'm pretty sure it's a banana. So it's an Andy Warhol thing. It's great. It's great. So yeah.
There is, man, and I know we've already covered that, but there is just so much room for play within that tactical analog reality that just doesn't exist digitally. Like you just could not
Yeah.
do you could not do those things. Not only would people not see them, but you could not do those things.
Oh, okay. Hands down. Yes, absolutely. The band that pushed it farther, I think, than anyone else I'm aware of is Parliament. At George Clinton Parliament P Funk. They had, I remember, and then Bootsy, who spun off from that. There was an album from Bootsy where he was famous for having like these star-shaped glasses with like rhinestones or diamonds or something around the edge. And one of the albums had glasses on the front. Like the cover had, I believe the cover had like perforations, and you could push out your own pair of like a cardboard version of it. Then they had another one. This is the last album rant. They had another album. It was a Parliament album where they always did concept albums. They had like different characters that they would bring into the songs and different themes. And there was this one where they had it was a gatefold album. It would open up and they had an insert, and you could punch out all of these little characters that were featured in the songs. And then the album itself was sort of like a play backdrop. Like they made kind of like a toy world, and you could punch the characters out and then move them around or something. I don't know if they were envisioning this was for like 8-year-olds. It's hilarious. Uh, just like a genius way to
Yeah.
repurpose that material that someone's gonna take home from the record store.
Yeah. and a way to interact with people who appreciate what you're doing.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's another interesting component of that. And it leads loosely into what we're doing, right? They are people that were doing things differently. So this topic of critical thinking and how or why to swim against the current, because I do think there's a question there. So I want to kind of start with that. You know, the metaphor of swimming against the current is pretty obvious. There is a force that is opposing you, and you are trying to go in that direction that the force is opposing. So there's a restrictive quality. There's an energy that is working against you. So my question is, going with the flow clearly offers less resistance, less energy output than working against the stream. And this is just if we're just viewing this as a river, right? Like if you get into a river and you put a tube on and you float down the river, that's going to be a much easier process than if you get in that river, you put a tube on and you try to go up the river. Is it worth it? Why would we want to go against this stream? Because it's hard.
Yeah, there's benefits to not doing it. There's benefits to to being with the herd. And as you talk about that, Patrick, I mean, I think about how it's really, it's almost like it's dependent on the time that you're living in. There are some times where it probably makes a great deal of sense to follow the herd and be within the consensus. And then there are other times where you can see the dislocations, the contradictions, the high weirdness of the times, and if you have awareness of that, then you don't have a choice. You have to pay attention to what is going on and think in a different way potentially, and push back against that, because it's hard to do, but sometimes you have to try to be sane in an insane society. Things are, but it is so strange. Like recently I've been questioning, because I've been thinking about this topic that you proposed, and sometimes I just question, am I really thinking critically, or am I just possessed by some thoughts and ideas and memes that other people have put out there? Which is it? Am I just captured by one side or the other, or am I actually an independent thinker at all?
I went through those same thoughts. I think those are very valid thoughts. I think that's a really important piece to add into this conversation. I also think, you mentioned it depends on what time you're living. It also depends, and time kind of works in this, but where you're living. Because in a hunter-gatherer society, 100% of the time, it is most advantageous to go with the flow, right? If you live around 200, 250 people, the opportunity for corruption is ridiculously limited, because if you're in a circle of 250 people, everyone's business, everyone knows your business. And if someone's taking advantage of the system, it is incredibly likely there are social repercussions that will take care of that problem. Now, at the same time, if you go outside of what's normal and you start doing your own thing in a society that small, you are going to almost certainly pay social consequences for doing so. And those social consequences, the way we evolved as humans 250,000 years ago, those social consequences were essentially, hey, get out of our living space. You're going to go die on your own out in the wilderness. And that was kind of the consequence. So we're set up, like the framework of our brain is set up to pay attention to what society is doing and to likely follow that because it was very advantageous for our ancestors. But also they had this protection, right? The ancestors had this protection of being in a small group and corruption being very limited. We've lost that cap on corruption. Essentially, we live in big enough societies now that corruption is very easily swept underneath the rug. And I think what I view is, if you go with the flow, there is going to be a certain amount of leakage of whatever it is, resources. How that resource gets leaked away from you, it is what it is. But the system is designed to kind of siphon off some of those resources. So then the question to me became, there's an amount of resources that are utilized for swimming against the stream for sure. So are we viewing this as like a resource for resource? Is it more resource conscious to swim with the stream, or is it more resource conscious to swim against society and kind of do your own thing? And I think that's an interesting question, but it may not be the ultimate question. But what do you think about that? Like, just resource, if we just vacuumed it out to resources, which way do you think leaks more energy, or energy may not be the right word, resources is more broad?
So Patrick, I love that we're having these conversations, because I would have never thought about the scale of the society that you're living in and how that relates to the honesty and the kind of efficiency of that system. And to your point, I mean, the other reason why it makes so much sense, with that small society to follow the herd, is that it is just evidently a more honest arrangement. It just has to be.
Absolutely.
And yeah, and as you say, there's just so much, as this society gets larger, there's a lot more opportunity for shenanigans.
Yes, shenanigans is a good word.
Scallywags. So I think that's a pretty interesting thing. So yeah, the question of resources and when does it make sense or not? I mean, I don't even know if you can really go about it necessarily in such a rational way all the time. I mean, sometimes it has to do with your temperament and your, almost like your disgust response. Like when you see the corruption, when you see the preposterous amount of acceleration in wealth inequality and all these things happening, and then at the same time, the institutions that are creating that lying to your face and saying that they're not doing it, or that it's not a consequence of their actions, it forces you essentially to almost pick a side, which is, they would like you to pick a side. They would like you to
make it super easy for them. Yeah.
red tribe or blue tribe, right?
Yes, for sure.
And that's a challenge. So I think I don't think it can, it has to be dependent on your situation too. And even if you are a heretic with your thoughts, it may not be in your best interest at the moment to go ahead and spread that around, that heresy of yours around everywhere. You may be living in such a strangely corrupt environment that you might need to keep some of those thoughts to yourself, because thought crime is certainly a thing these days.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think that's kind of right on the mark of what I was thinking. And what I really kind of boiled this down to for me is, I think there is an effort component to swimming against the stream, to doing things uniquely, or to working against the societal norms. And I think likely that it takes more effort. I think likely that the metaphor holds true, and to do things your own way requires more effort. I do think that if we think about what is the worst thing we could do to a human, it is essentially taking away their ability to make choice. And if everything is pulled away from you, and you are just this is how everything is laid out for you, that seems to create very, very miserable humans. So I look at this, there's this saying, and I'm going to try to jumble all these thoughts and put them in a context that makes some sense. But there's this saying that took me like a year to understand from Sakuru, which is, you are responsible for everything. And when he says that, he doesn't mean like, oh, you're responsible for everything you do. He will literally say, Patrick, you are responsible for World War II. Patrick, you are responsible for World War I. And that like is so jarring and off-putting, because hey, Sadhguru, I wasn't alive for either of those events. How do I have responsibility for them? And his response is, you have the ability to respond to what has happened. And that, once that idea kind of ingrained within me, I started to really appreciate things differently, because when you have the ability to respond to anything that happens, you have complete freedom. And I think this path of swimming upstream offers you complete freedom, even if you are working so hard that you are only treading water. You are controlling what you are doing, and that feeling of being able to do what you want to do, even if it doesn't work out, there's some benefit to that. So this thought of swimming upstream, really, I think, okay, working against the societal norms is going to likely cost you more resources. It can also lead to fantastic rewards, right? Like, we've used Bezos plenty of times on this thing. If he didn't do something that was abnormal and create an online bookstore, he's not a billionaire flying into space for 30 seconds. Like that doesn't happen unless you do that. So there's opportunity for reward, but the likelihood is you're not going to become Jeff Bezos. The likelihood is you're more likely to become Patrick Brennan than Jeff Bezos. And
that's a good deal. I'll
well,
take it. I'll take it, man.
Some people might take that, but there's a lot of people that wouldn't take that. Like there's a lot of effort that goes in. And I think when people come out and visit me, more often than not, they're shocked by the amount of things I do and the amount of work that's going into my life. And it just feels normal for me. But I also realize it's not normal. It is absolutely abnormal that at 5 o'clock, I don't turn off the lights and start like living. At 5 o'clock, I'm halfway through the workday. A lot of times I'm like, let's go plant some seeds like that. So I think that what the question came down to for me of, is it worth it, is effort, is a ridiculous amount of effort worth the freedom that it offers me? And for some people, that answer may very clearly be no. Like, for some people, the answer is at 5 o'clock, I get my freedom, right? At 5 o'clock till when I go to bed, that's my free time. But for me, the freedom is when I wake up to when I go to bed. And I also am working my ass off in the middle of that. So to me, the question of, okay, is it worth it, became yes, very easy. It was the freedom that I've created that allows that. And that is what works for me, and it doesn't work for everybody. Is there a calculation you can put around that idea of, is it worth it, before we get into how you do it? Because I think, is it worth it is a very important question for everyone to ask. And asking that question alone is kind of like critically thinking about your life. Is this worth it to go against the path?
Well, it probably depends on your level of awareness and your ability to tolerate pain. So
yeah, pain for sure. Absolutely.
So I mean, the society,
risk tolerance.
The society would like you to compromise a lot of things that that are part of your humanness, I would say.
Yes.
And they would like you to forget about those things. They would like you to forget about those feelings, those experiences. They would like you to suppress all of that, maybe channel it just into consumption and planning for the future, and playing their games, picking one side or the other, and then being mad at the other side. And there's probably like you mentioned freedom. There's a price for that freedom. I think part of that price is alienation.
Absolutely.
To some degree, right?
Yes.
Maybe that's an okay thing. I mean, it's interesting, I've been reading, I started picking up and rereading this old this old book, Timothy Leary, High Priest, and it's all about him. It opens up with him being like a 44-year-old psychology professor, having two children, traveling abroad, being in Spain, uh, being being sick, having some kind of sickness he comes down with, and trying to not get kicked out of this tiny hotel that he's in because one of his kids wants this puppy that he found on the streets in Spain or something, and he's sick out of his mind, and he's like has these boils or these something erupting all over his body, and he has a fever, and he's on the floor wiping up dog crap, and he has to hide the fact that they have a dog so they don't get kicked out of this place. And he throws the dirty rags and toilet paper out the window, and it hangs up on a clothesline as a flag to his to his lies, or his, you know, his sneaking this dog in. He reaches this absolute low point. And this book, though, is about him essentially cracking through what he thought was what he should be doing, and gaining access to all of these, you know, high weirdness psychedelic spaces, and really coming in contact with some kind of very ecstatic and religious experience. And so as I'm listening to this, I'm thinking, am I focusing, or as I'm reading this, I'm thinking, have I been focusing on all the wrong things? I've been focusing so much on protection, on trying to like, you know, yeah, find that insulation from the culture in, and build up, I guess, material, some kind of material wealth and protection in that way. And I'm forgetting about this other space completely. I've completely disregarded the spiritual element, and all of these things that I was far more concerned with when I was younger. And so I don't even know what your original question was anymore, but there are all these spaces that the culture would prefer you didn't explore, because it really doesn't serve the culture at all.
Yeah.
And so I guess part of critical thinking might be taking a step back away from the culture. Like I think about in meditation, they talk about you know, the observer, and maybe can you get to the point where you're up in the balcony and you're observing yourself. And in the same way, maybe that's what we need to do with the cultural moment that we exist in, if we really want to think critically. Like, can you step outside of the headlines that you see on your phone and look at this from a historic perspective instead? And maybe that gives you a little more context, and will help you to better choose a course of action, or how a course for how you want to live your life, instead of being caught up in choosing a side, or even being caught up in just whatever, pandemic, all that stuff. Like,
Yeah.
zooming out, viewing it from the balcony, I think can be a critically important thing to thinking critically and swimming against that current.
I think you think yes. That balcony thing is super interesting, because the balcony is a completely different perspective. Um, I saw a comedy show like right before COVID shut down, so probably February of 2020, and we chose to sit up in a balcony. And it was the first time I had seen comedy from a balcony. And the perspective shift was so dramatic that the moment I got up there, it just, everything looked like a performance, right? If I had been sitting at stage level, it like feels like a conversation, and comedy is not a conversation. It is a performance. But the moment I got this little bit of elevation, and it was 20 feet, right? I'm looking down, and all of a sudden it's just like, oh, these guys are putting on a play. I'm just watching a play that they've done 10,000 times, that they are not attached to at all. They are pretending to be attached to the things they're saying because they have repeated them every weekend for the last 52 weekends. and that came from 20 feet of shift. So I think that we forget how valuable little tiny perspective shifts can be. And we know that they're, like, we hear all the time, eyewitness testimony is really unreliable because everybody has a different perspective of what they saw. And the moment that you come into a scene dramatically impacts how you interpret things. And I think also when we look at what is going on in society today, the value of critical thinking is exponentially increased because things are set up right now so that you make binary choices, so that it is super easy to be like, I wear a red hat, so I'm against these things. I wear a blue hat, so I'm against these things. Instead of thinking, hey, what are the things that I value? Like, maybe the color of hat that I wear should be led on by the thoughts that I actually have, instead of starting with the color of hat that I wear, deciding how I think. And I think we are in a position right now. I know we are in a position right now because I'm having these conversations where the color of hat you wear decides how you think about things instead of the other way around. And that is really interesting, and it's deeply woven into the fabric of our society.
Absolutely. And to bring this back to your original story, comedy is hypnosis. It really is. Like, it's more than just performance. Like, they're a magician and they're hypnotizing the crowd.
Absolutely.
And so for you to be in the balcony, I would imagine it was almost just not as funny because you were able to be detached from it.
Yes.
And so if you're going to a comedy show to be entertained, you actually should willingly choose to be hypnotized and be down in the crowd with everyone else. But if it's your whole life you're talking about, do you really want to be hypnotized with that crowd? You have to move to the balcony. So I think that's a brilliant thing you picked up there. I mean, I mean, we've talked before about how, like, a fish doesn't know what water is, right? And it's not that we're all swimming in water, it's that we're almost all in our own separate fish bowls. Some of us are in salt water, some of us are in fresh water. Like, Terence McKenna had a term for this. He called it the balkanization of epistemology. If you want to know what that means, just Google those two words. But anyways, what it means is that you have all of these people. It's beyond just red and blue, but you have these groups that are split up into different worldviews. They have different languages, they have different value structures, they have different beliefs. And they can't even talk to each other. It is like oil and water. They just do not mix. And so, oftentimes, like this week, I've been taking a step back and thinking, okay, I have some strongly held opinions or views about something. Is it because I really think that and I really have some knowledge around that? Or is it because that just aligns with the tribe that I most identify with? And if all of your beliefs, if all of your values align with the tribe that you sort of have affinity towards, are you really thinking for yourself? Are you really a free agent, or are you just hypnotized? Are you just down there in the crowd with everyone else? And it's a fascinating thought exercise, and I don't think most people are cut out for that. I think it's far too uncomfortable to do that. It's uncomfortable for me to do it.
It is uncomfortable. Yes.
Yeah.
I think that's a really good word.
Yeah.
But I would argue that we're all cut out. Like, we have all the capabilities. Everyone has the capabilities required to do this. And I think, using red and blue as the analogy can be off-putting, because what you mentioned, this is like red and blue just happen to be the two political colors, but this is not necessarily a political conversation. The political thing is like, it's there, but there are so many things. the binary choices of yes or no are broken out across society now. I mean, the nuanced conversation is essentially has essentially been eliminated from our culture. It is yes, no, move on to the next thing. And if it's
Yep.
no, you don't move on to the next thing because you can't have a conversation with that person. And if you do have a conversation with that person, it's likely going to end in a fist fight. So you may as well not have that conversation. So with that, like with the prevalence of this of that within the culture, of the prevalence of like whether, and sometimes I think the challenge is when it's yes, no, sometimes when you say no, you think you're critically thinking, right? There's only two choices, but you chose the negative, quote unquote, of the two choices, and therefore you believe you're critically thinking. And I think that is a danger that's out there right now. Is people seem to believe that just because they have an opposing thought process, um, that means they're critically thinking. And I don't think that's true either. I think that you can, I could say whatever, right? Like I can say, hey, there's no oxygen on planet Earth. That is in opposition to the norm, but it's not critically thinking. It's just wrong. And those are two really different concepts. So with the prevalence in society, and with this idea of like everything is so set up to choose yes or no, how do we find the path to elevation? How do we get to the balcony where we can kind of look down? Is there a thread that you like to start from to pull yourself up?
Uh, so it's interesting. Yeah. So there's so many different places
I
that we could
know.
take this, but what I think is what is so interesting today is if you'd like to try to like dig down to the truth of something, you can find something online that will corroborate your position, no matter what it is.
No matter what it is, for sure.
And I think it's very evident if you're being honest about it. If you look into the literature, that like science, some science has been captured by this as well.
Absolutely.
And so and even if you are a scientist or an engineer or something, that doesn't mean like I'm aware when I look at different research papers online that I'm not always qualified to know if this, a particular study was performed correctly or not, or if the statistical analysis is done right, or if they're gaming the thing, if they're cherry picking data for studies for a meta-analysis. I can find something for Rona that's about this vitamin or that vitamin or this supplement or that supplement, or a drug, does it work or not. I can find tons of papers and meta-analysis for both sides.
Both sides. Yep.
That I find just completely horrifying at this point. And so then you're left to choose, well, okay, which type. You're almost left to pick personalities. Like one person's talking about it, I prefer their personality versus this other person. That's terrible. I think it's interesting though to pay attention to, if you can't figure it out for yourself and you have to listen to experts, you should pay attention to who are the heretics, who has nothing to gain, who are the people that are have nothing to gain from pushing their opinion, and maybe they actually have something to lose for pushing that opinion. I think that's pretty interesting. But if you look at like Schopenhauer's, I think that's how you pronounce it, his 3 stages of truth. That's a fascinating one. So truth is first ridiculed, and then it's violently opposed, and then it is deemed to be self-evident, right? And so sometimes it's interesting to question, well, are we just in a stage of truth for some particular, talking point where it's just being violently opposed, and pretty soon it's going to be self-evident, because you see that happen like in real time right now, all the time. I think that's just, it's terrible for the average person who's trying to like dig down and understand what is real and what is not. And
Yeah.
so we live in very confusing times, and that is all the more reason to do what you're doing, which is to essentially drop out of a lot of the value systems and a lot of the games of the culture, and swim against that stream. Because why the hell would you go downstream with this when there's just like dead fish and old fish hooks and garbage in the river? Like uh,
Yeah.
it's just such a mess out there. And so to pull yourself out of that to some degree, I think is just a necessary action.
Whew. Man, I I think that's real. I think it's fascinating. I think we are entering an interesting place that I'm not sure. Shoot, I don't know. I've only been alive for 40 years, so who the heck knows? But we seem to be in this place, what feels very unique, where the self-evident component of this seems like it could have flaws because the bubbles that people are living within have have developed different realities. And if the different the truth, right, if we I have this deeper conversation with myself about a universal reality, because I think the word reality is very valuable. I think that the self-evidency of a universal reality has to be self-evidency wouldn't be the right word, but I think there needs to be a shared understanding of a self-evident reality. And I am worried that we are losing grip with a shared reality because we are rewarding things that are clearly not. We are rewarding speaking about things as if they are real that will never possibly be self-evident. And we are pretending that things that are not self-evident are self-evident, and just allowing that to slip into the fabric of society. And I think that there's this very dangerous concept to me that that is, interestingly, man, I don't want to make this. I'm not gonna bring in the sides in on this at all, because I don't want this to be about sides.
Yeah.
But there is this idea that is pushed that everyone deserves to have their own truth. And I think that is such a dangerous idea. I think that everyone absolutely deserves to have their own perspective, because you have your own perspective. But there must be societal rewards for pushing your perspective towards the universal truth. And the universal truth is a place that we all exist and share ownership of. And if we start saying that that place doesn't exist anymore, we lose the connection, the fabric of society that allows us to exist within society. And I am very, very concerned about granting people the right to have their own reality, because it does not work for formulating a functioning society for everyone to be able to say whatever you want, and you not to be able to say, man, there is not a 37-foot snake like right behind me. That's not a thing that is happening right now. And if you see that, like, we need to get you some mental help. It's not like, it's not a question of, is there a snake behind me? I know there's not a snake behind me right now. There's snakes behind me. If I go far enough, there probably is. But right here in this room, there's
Yeah.
not. So there needs to be some type of I believe that there's a social repercussion that has to be enforced when you are saying things that are just not, that could not possibly ever be given that gift of self-evidency, because they're just not true within the reality that we all share. And I think we're pushing away from that idea. And I think that it is a remarkably dangerous path to work ourselves down. And it's probably the concept that terrifies me most.
it, it'll go away. But
I hope
unfortunately, so,
so.
so I think that I mean, this is just par for the course right now because we live in such a wealthy and decadent society that
Yeah,
you have the luxury of just kind of screwing around quite a bit
that's
if you
that's very
want
true.
to. And
Absolutely.
and and so you can see that the culture is splintering off in all these different directions. And you'd mentioned how you don't want to get this down to red and blue or picking. I think part of this is that if you've picked a side, you're wrong.
Yep.
Like
Absolutely.
absolutely. And I think it's not the choice between picking one side or the other. It's the choice between picking polarization or picking some kind of unity,
Yep.
essentially. Um, and but right now, I mean, everyone, I think so many people are under a collective hypnosis, and we used to have more of a cohesive society. If you go back to the hunter gatherer, to the archaic, tribes and all of that, they had more of a periodic religious communion that would bind
Absolutely.
everyone together, that would help reestablish a shared worldview.
Yep.
And now that doesn't happen anymore. Any kind of use of those kinds of substances, and I'm too old and like rigid and freaked out to even dabble in that anymore. But nowadays, that's just been like kind of brought into Western values of, well, this will be good for you, this will help your productivity. And now the real, I hate to say it, but like the people that bring back the knowledge, the last ones are really, well, it's not Bezos, but it's the astronauts, the real astronauts that went to space and looked down at the planet
Yeah.
in the 60s. That was like a completely, mind, like skull breaking open, mind expanding experience for them, where they
Absolutely.
realized, oh, all of this political nonsense that we're engaged in, this infighting on the planet, is a ridiculous distraction,
Yeah.
right? And we should really simplify this thing down to, like, turning this place into some kind of Garden of Eden and protecting the
Man.
planet from asteroids. And then if you want to screw around with like populating Mars or the moon, cool, do that next. But let's focus on this
Yeah.
place and figuring that out. But yeah, picking sides. I mean, you should question like whether or not you're really in control of your opinion and your views or not, or if you're just being run by headlines. And by one last thing on this rant is your personality. So if you give people a
Mm-hmm.
personality test, you can predict, I think, within like 75% or 80% confidence what their political preference is. And
Yeah.
so some of this you cannot necessarily control. People that have dirty bedrooms and more chaotic living spaces, I'm not saying that as a judgment. You should see what's behind on the other side of this camera. they tend to be they tend to be maybe less conscientious and maybe more on the left leaning side, whereas people, and I'm sorry, people actually that are more open, people that are more open to new ideas, it's called being high in openness, those people are apparently more on the left leaning side. People that are on the more conservative side and that would like to hold the existing values together, they have a higher disgust response. They see something going wrong and they're disgusted by it. Whereas
Mm.
people on the left are like, look, let it fly. Who cares? My bedroom's a mess. Um, and so everything's fine. And so I'm saying is that, like, you're not even necessarily in charge of whether you're gonna lean left or right. It's not always up to you. And so to have awareness of that, and then to have the, I don't know, call it courage maybe, to entertain something that's on the other side of the aisle, just to see what that feels like and to see if maybe there's some truth there.
Mm-hmm.
That's a fascinating exercise. Maybe you'll learn something about yourself. Um, yeah,
Almost certainly you will.
yeah.
I think that piece, can you put yourself in the position where you view the opposite perspective. And that doesn't mean, you know, like if you are vehemently opposed to whatever thought process you're having, it doesn't mean you have to like flip sides. Like, can you just think about it and see where the common ground is? And then once you understand the common ground, you have so much more opportunity to move forward. And I see this is part of the binary process. Is there is essentially no willingness to think about the other side of the coin and what the other side of the coin may want, or the feelings the other side of the coin may have. And whether you agree with the feelings or desires of the other side of the coin doesn't necessarily matter. But if you want to get anything done, you have to figure out how to get the other side of the coin to interact. Like, even if you believe you are 100% right, if you are in a situation where it is a 50-50 split, and it's you arguing against one other person, if you want to have any type of positive ending to this outcome, you have to figure out where you can bring that person closer to you. And if you think the way to bring the other person closer is to tell them how wrong they are, you're gonna be disappointed. And I will guarantee you've been disappointed every single time you've done that, because it works out the same every single time.
I heard this great line, which is that you can win arguments or you can win. and no one likes to be told that they're wrong or building bridges at all. It doesn't work for making connections. And I mean, society, you know, this whole theme of swimming against the stream, I mean, you have to realize it's good to like understand that like society runs on durable fictions of all sorts, and we just sort of accept them. And your ability to well, investors talk about how your ability to remain, the market can be irrational longer than you can actually keep your investment or your trade in the game, right? And it's the same thing with the culture. Like, the culture can be out of sync with proper values for a hell of a long time. And it's so you might just have to find your own people, your own tribe, and create your own thing and push in a very small, localized level to make things the way you want them to be, instead of trying to go out there and ask other people with power and control to change them for you, because that's not going to work. But I mean, like, just to get specific for a minute on some of the durable fictions that like we run on in the developed world, I made a quick list. So one might be that your vote matters in a two-party system. Another one might be that the national debt doesn't matter, and that you can just print money, and that's the same thing as wealth. That increasing the amount of currency units is the same thing as increasing wealth. That works for a while, but not forever, because those digits don't actually have intrinsic value. Another one might be that JFK, that whole thing doesn't matter. I want to get back to that in a second. That creeping corruption is okay. The cultural decay isn't happening, and that we can collectively just ignore risk. But so if you swim against the current with your thoughts, if you're some sort of thought criminal, you're going to be identified and labeled as such. And this gets back to JFK. It was a few years after his assassination in '62 that I think was the FBI or CIA, one of those two. I think it was the CIA. They noticed that there were these pesky people who were questioning the narrative of what happened there. And so they came up with a term, conspiracy theorist. And then they shared that, they pushed that out to the newspapers and made sure that they used that term to label and cartoonify and dehumanize and belittle anyone who has a position that goes against against the narrative that was put forth, by the government, right? And so this will happen all the time now. Anyone, if you do not fall in line with what the durable fictions are and with what the norm is right now, you'll be labeled in some way. You'll be cartoonified and dehumanized in some way. Yep. And the mob that is opposed to you, they might come get you sometime if you're too loud, right? Mm-hmm. That happens to people. And so I think this is a terrible thing where essentially if you use that term, you're really just saying, well, I totally side with the establishment, and anyone who disagrees with it obviously doesn't have a real position. And then you're just siding with just the power structures. It's a fascinating thing. And so like the hijacking of language, you have to be essentially, if you're going to swim upstream and against the current, you have to see how language plays a really important role in all of this as well.
Yeah. So I've been thinking about that from the exact opposite side, which is really interesting. I've been thinking about, I think that 10 years ago, the term conspiracy theorist really did mean critical thinker. To me.
Yeah, and good point.
And now I feel like there has been I think there are some really interesting things to look at. I think the JFK assassination is a very interesting thing. There are things that went on around that event that don't make a ton of logical sense, right? Like there are weird things there, and I don't know what that means, but I do think it's an interesting thing to look at. But to lump that idea and flat Earth or hollow Earth in the same encapsulation,
totally,
really it really changes the way you think about those people who were thinking about really weird things. I actually think the 60s moon thing is really weird, and I don't know. Like every smart being says we went to the moon. But I find it super, I have no idea. I think we probably did. I hope we did. Or man, there are really good liars out there. Like those are two things. But it's weird. It's weird that the United States did something in the 60s that no other country has been able to replicate. And that the technology for doing what we did in the 60s has gotten more expensive. And that all of these space flights that we go on are 500 miles off Earth's surface. Like the space station is roaming around at 500 miles, and that's the furthest we've ever been, except for the times when we traveled 183,000 miles to the moon. And those are huge differences. And I want to know more about that, because that is fascinating to me, that we can't just get on a freaking plane right now and bump up to the moon because it's 2020 and we did this thing in freaking 1960 where we went there and we slungshot our way around the moon with this gravitational force load, and all these brilliant beings were able to do these things. I think those are questions that I want out there, but I can't have that conversation anymore, because the moment I have that conversation, someone's like, "Oh, you think the Earth's hollow too?" I'm like, maybe. No, I don't think the Earth's hollow.
Yeah. I don't know. That's a great point, that the terminology has been corrupted further, where you label people that are preposterous, people that have totally preposterous positions. Yes. You muddy the waters of what a questioning person might be, someone who's thoughtfully questioning, versus just a loon, just a crazy person. Yes. So we live in such strange times now, and I don't even know. I mean, it's almost like all of it is a distraction to get you to not think about what you should be doing in your own life to make things better. And I don't know. I just, and then and the phone, of course, the phone sucks everybody, and they would like you to have these clenched fists and to be outraged about something. I
Yep.
mean, can you please be outraged about something so you can keep viewing our app, and so
Yep.
we can serve you more ads, so we can, sell all this ad space to advertisers. I mean, and that is the whole game, and no one even really, people don't have awareness of that game, what's really happening there. And this
Yep.
mass hypnosis. So like, what are your thoughts on maybe other ways to get out of this, to basically take your hand out of that bucket of water that is the culture? Like, what are your thoughts on like how it is that you get your brain onto a less corrupted frequency?
So I think there's a couple of things. One, I think it's really important that when you question something, that you also identify what is the thing that could disprove your questioning, right? So like again, I will use the moon thing because I think it's fascinating. Like, hey, how is it like I want to have the conversation with somebody at NASA and be like, how is it possible that you had these warehouses full of computers that have less power than the iPhone you have in your hand right now, and yet we're not going there every day? And I bet somebody has that answer. And when somebody answers that question, like, boom, okay, then we know that answer. What I think is really dangerous is when you've identified a side, and then no matter what someone shows you, no matter what evidence is presented, you're just going to change the goalpost, right? If once you start changing the goalpost, the conversation is essentially over. If we've established a goalpost, and then we disprove that goalpost, or we prove that goalpost exists, and then the goalpost gets moved another 100 feet, we can't do that, because you can just do that forever. We can always move the goalpost. So I think it's really important to set your goalposts. Like, what are the things that you need to know? And then identify around those things that you need to know, like what actually makes sense. And maybe you can't get 100% certainty, but can you get 95% certainty? Like, are you willing to stake everything about your reputation on a 5% chance? Like, would you step up to a roulette wheel and be like, hey, you're either going to be completely believed or completely disbelieved for the rest of your life. You have a 5% chance of being believed. Spin that thing and go. Would you do that? Likely it's no, but maybe it's not, right? If something is that important to you, then take that 5% risk, because you might be right. And maybe as you expand your knowledge base, you can increase that 5% to 10% to 15%. And that is the way that things change, right? And also to understand that when you are taking a controversial perspective, or if you don't believe it's controversial, but you believe it is not yet recognized, understand that there is a process of introducing not yet recognized ideas into your societal fabric, not just society at large, but the people that you know. And can you approach those positions in a way that is not confrontational, that is not divisive, and that is inclusive? Because the more inclusive you are in everything you do, the more successful you will be in everything that you get yourself involved in.
Yeah, it's good. I mean, it's kind of like corrosive to the soul to live in a dishonest society, right?
Yeah,
You think
absolutely.
about, and to take it back to your original point with the hunter gatherers, well, not that they had access to it, but you probably wouldn't have like a large swath of the population taking antidepressants, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely, without a doubt.
Yeah, and this is like a lot, like people have like compared what's happening today with like late stage Roman Empire, the decadence of it, and
absolutely,
and sort of like leading up to some kind of collapse, because things do not stay static. Countries go through periods where everyone has a shared value system that seems like pretty well aligned with what's real and what's correct. And then other times things get out of balance, and clearly that's where we're at today. And I think partially you have to just get comfortable with ambiguity and understand, and like just the realization and the acceptance that like the information streams are corrupted, the modern day ones. I think it's very useful maybe to read old books. Like if you'd like to get out of the corrupted information stream, read books that are 100 years old.
Yeah.
And maybe you'll find something there. Because go back, do things that are outside of the culture, like planting seeds. After the 9 to 5 hours are over, right?
Yeah.
Engaging in activities that the culture doesn't necessarily deem as valuable or worthwhile because they don't have a good way to siphon value off of it, essentially. And maybe put that damn phone down from time to time. See, this is just advice for me. I'm just giving myself advice right now, right?
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
I'm not good at any of this. And the hypnosis. I love that metaphor, and wondering, asking yourself, are you on the ground floor? Are you in the mob, or are you up on the balcony?
That is such a massive, question. I also, you brought up Rome, and I've been thinking about Rome as we've been talking about this, so that's pretty interesting. And I do think there's some significant value in studying ancient societies. I think there is so much value in studying early humans, because understanding how the human brain has evolved to respond is remarkably valuable. Get into evolutionary biology or evolutionary psychology, whatever they call it these days. Political correctness has changed that name. But also ancient societies are really good, and Rome in particular, because so much of our society is based on Roman norms. And the collapse of Rome, it is it is so, if you get in, Rubicon is a great book, but if you get into the fall of Rome, there is so much mirrored ideology as to what we are going through now. And I think it's really fascinating. I started thinking about Rome because, you said something along the lines of breaking out and doing things against the norm. And one of the things that the Senate used to hate about Caesar is that he wore his toga loosely bound. Like it was the most controversial thing ever, that Caesar started to wear this loosely bound toga. And then the generation below Caesar, who looked up to Caesar, started to adapt that fashion sense. And that fashion sense became this like divisive thing within Roman culture. And you think about how silly is that in a society where everyone essentially wears the exact same thing? They've figured out a way to make that divisive. And that is just wonderfully reflective of the binary worlds that we like to create for ourselves.
That's incredible. That seems to me like the 1950s versus the 1960s.
Absolutely, yeah.
That's a fascinating thing. I mean, I don't know that much about the fall of Rome, but one of the things in the late stage that happened that gets back to the dishonesty of society is they started diluting their money. So they had gold and silver coins. They started, mixing in copper and diluting their money.
Yep.
And so you can look at a country. You can actually look at a country's coins, the old coins of a country, and you can really gain some knowledge there about how wealthy the society was and how honest the society was. How much did they dilute their coins with base metal, or do they get to the point where they just essentially have tokens that have purely symbolic value only?
Yep.
And don't have any intrinsic value? I think that's a fascinating thing, and it gets down to honesty on some level, and the lie, kind of like the lies and the deception and the shortcuts pile up and pile up until the final straw kind of breaks the back of that camel. But in the meantime, when all that corruption is happening, that can be a great time for a lot of people. People can make a lot of money, acquire a lot of private jets and whatever else in those times, because you can siphon so much money out of that system, and you can do a lot of productive good as well in those times. But it's something to be aware of. Yeah, I like that idea, Patrick, of Rome. Yeah, Rubicon. I have not read that.
Rubicon is great. The Dan Carlin 7-part series on the fall of Rome is, it is, I think, 9 hours. And I think I have probably listened to that 6 times. Like I will dedicate, man, I love that telling of that tale. I also, to cycle back to another thing you said that I think is valuable, that kind of ties into what we're saying now, which is there is opportunity within this. I have a theory that essentially every human that lives is likely going to get about 3 panicked opportunities within the stock market. And like, if instead of being fully invested all the time in the stock market, you just took those 3 panic moments when the market is acting irrationally, and you have complete detachment, right? So if you're invested, you don't have complete detachment. If you are invested in the stock market and the stock market is crashing, there is a guttural reaction within you that is like, all of this wealth that I had accumulated in quotation marks, is evaporating, because that is what it's doing. And that changes the way you respond to things. And that's why the market acts in ways that rational humans wouldn't react, because it is a panicked, it is a mob mentality. But if you just sat outside for those moments and you just waited until the mob started to panic, and then you put your resources to use at the point of panic, and as panic grows, you put more and more resources to use, those returns look good. And you can kind of look back on how that has historically played out. Past performance is not indicative of future returns, but man, I would love the opportunity to hit all 3 of those panics in my life. First 2, I definitely did not have that opportunity, but the third one I feel really good about. When that third one happens, I feel really comfortable that there's massive opportunity. And I like to tell everybody that. It's just like, man, we're gonna have another panic. There's going to be another sell-off. How it comes, why it comes, who knows? But it's coming for sure. And to have some resources readily available just for that purpose seems like a really good idea to me.
It's interesting. I mean, the counterexample to that would be Japan, which even though they're printing like mad all the time, their stock market only just recently hit, the same nominal value that it had maybe, I don't know, 30 years ago or something, maybe in the 90s. So who the heck knows? But you could be sure, we're going to have like some pretty epic inflation, but there's probably going to have to be there'll have to be like a significant deflationary event, a real crash, before we can justify going even crazier with the money. I mentioned old books before. Even old cartoons tell the truth. I was watching with one of my kids, I was watching a Scrooge McDuck Disney cartoon from 1967. And he was talking about how you should store your wealth. And of course, what does Scrooge have? He has gold. He has a little bit of cash, but he has gold. And maybe some silver too. But they were warning in that cartoon, and they were talking about how much money $1 billion is. They said if you have $1 billion in like paper dollar bills, it can go around the earth 4 times. And they were like, $1 billion and $1 trillion is $1,000 billion, right? So like, what I think that's what it is. So we're
Yeah.
So like, the things are just getting so crazy with that, and people don't even know about it anymore because they would prefer that you didn't. Like that Scrooge McDuck cartoon from 1967 has far more education in it about the financial system and about currency units versus wealth and the potential for inflation and devaluation and loss of purchasing power than anything you're going to get today, probably even in college. It's really sad.
That's crazy.
And it is a fascinating thing so we're so used to the virtual that everyone's comfortable with just digits on a screen held at some bank somewhere, and you're fine with that. That has what's called counterparty risk, right? You are at risk. Someone else holds on to that for you. And people are very uncomfortable with the idea of actually like holding in their physical ownership, their physical possession, any silver coins, any gold coins. That feels so uncomfortable to people because everything is virtual. It's easier that way. You don't have to take personal responsibility for it. You would prefer to have the counterparty risk and have someone else manage that for you. And so that's where we find ourselves today. That's part of this game. And they appreciate when you have someone else take ownership of your wealth for you, because then they can skim some percentages off of that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's a weird thing. It almost sounds like very I don't know, very like low level and low consciousness level to think about or to discuss money. But there's something that it's really a larger discussion about the honesty of the culture in some sense when you're talking about it. And you think about how like an ounce of silver, it's whatever, 25, $30 if you want to buy an ounce of silver. It has all sorts of uses. It's the most electrically conductive metal on the planet. It's used in phones. It's used in electronics everywhere. It's used in solar panels. Yeah, and most of the good stuff has been mined out. It's hard to actually get silver out of the ground now, and yet it's only like 25 or $30 an ounce. But a Bitcoin, which is a virtual thing, you can value so much higher because it doesn't exist. It's like the abstraction of it allows you to assign stupid money values to it. And so I've been trying to like wrap my head around that, where like ideas, people can like place way more value on ideas than the physical item itself. And I think largely that is a distortion that at some point will revert back to some kind of mean, and that won't be the case anymore. That we will value hard resources, being able to produce things and being able to live in the 3D world again. But that is not quite the case right now. But it won't be a great time when that happens. There will be some kind of, it won't be Mad Max probably. Won't be Mad Max probably, but it might be.
Probably. Yeah.
Mad Max, I think, was set in this year, 2021. So we still have a few months to go. But yeah, it is so interesting to just take a step back onto the balcony and just view what are those values that the culture has right now. And are those aligned with what feels good to your soul and what it is to be human?
Yeah. Yes. It's such a scary, that is, if you think about what it would take to make all of this digital imagination essentially valueless, it's not that much. I mean, we are working with a 60 to 80-year-old power grid, and
Yeah.
you think if we lost the capacity to turn things on, how quickly I
Yeah.
mean, look around your house right now and think about if we couldn't turn things on, what would actually have value? What are the things that would actually be useful if we lost power? And it's not a lot. Like, I am looking around, I'm in the kitchen, which is probably the worst possible place to be, right? But like, shoot, it would be bad news.
Yeah.
So man, I think ugh, that is a really interesting thing. And I think when we are thinking about what it is like to think critically, there is a lot of value in going back to the digital analog episode, because right now analog things are very much out of vogue. I mean, the analogy of Bitcoin versus gold versus silver versus any of those metals um, is really, really, really clear and distinct.
Yeah.
And if we can't turn things on, your $30,000 Bitcoin is worth less than zero.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, we could probably do a whole episode on money, but I mean, it is interesting that I think it was in 2018, 2017, um, the central banks, maybe it's 2018, maybe, I don't know, somewhere around there. The central banks of the world in 1 year, they bought more gold than they bought in the prior like 60 years combined. And the reason why they did that is because they were front running a decision that came down from like the what was it? I don't know if it was Basel. No, not Basel III. I don't know what it is right now, but basically it was something that said, okay, gold is now considered a riskless tier one asset, just alongside US treasuries, along United States debt. Before that, the only riskless asset for international trade and settlement was US treasuries. Now, why is that? The reason why that is because the US dollar used to be something that you could convert if you were outside of the country. You're from France, you're from Germany, you have a bunch of dollars. You could go to the US and say, give me gold for that. So the
Yep.
US dollar used to be as good as gold. That went away in 1971 with Nixon. It used to be, if you have an old coin from you have a quarter from 1964 or earlier, it's 90% silver. It's worth far more than 25 cents, right? So now, though, we just have tokens. We're living with dishonest currency units, and with that, we have a growing dishonesty in the culture, and the distortions just continue to grow. And the power grid, yeah, we're gonna get everyone driving a Tesla. I'm sure the grid will be fine with that. That won't be a problem. So
Yeah. Let's hope so.
I mean, and you look at the market for old Jeeps, for old vehicles that will survive an EMP blast, that don't have fuel injection. It's out of control. People will pay $20,000, $30,000, $100,000 if it's a beautifully restored vehicle, because when the world is running down, you want to make the best of what's still around. And some people, so to get back to what you said about investing and buying when things are low, analog is very cheap right now. You should buy things that are cheap. Don't buy things when they're expensive. Buy things when they're cheap. So stockpile as much butter as you can, I guess. I don't know.
Shoot, if you're getting cheap butter right now, congratulations, because butter has gone crazy too. But yeah, stockpile butter, because butter's amazing.
There you go. Yeah.
Any final thoughts? Any final thoughts aside from stockpile butter?
I mean, I think we've covered so many things. It's really like, this has been it's been a bizarre episode. It's gone in so many places, Patrick. And I love that. I think it's really about self-examination and questioning your assumptions and your your tendencies for whatever side or tribe you have affinity towards. And one, just thinking to yourself, am I under hypnosis on the ground floor at the comedy show, or am I on the balcony viewing this with some detachment and some objectivity?
And I think there's value in remembering, right? Like you can criticize your own ideology without doing it out loud. Like no one has to know. You can critically think about everything you believe in without sharing that to the world. And you can come right back to whatever makes you feel comfortable and safe as well, right? Like there's no risk. There is no, if you are truly seeking the truth. The truth is out there, right? X-Files folks, the truth is out there. And if you are truly seeking that, there is no risk in offering criticism of the deeply held thoughts that you have, because if they are true to reality, they will only solidify, they will only get stronger. But if you're unwilling to think about the opposing side of the things you deeply believe in, what does that say about those things you deeply believe in?
Yeah, people tend to set up a straw man argument instead of an Iron Man argument,
Absolutely.
Steel Man argument, right?
Yeah. Knock those easy things down and never think about the rest.
That's right.
Heck yeah, man. This was fun. This was like you said, unexpected and meandering and beautiful.
Yeah, man, this is great. I love this. You challenge me, bring up so many interesting ideas, and I love that. To finish it on a human note, I mentioned your shirt before, but no one's watching this on YouTube compared to the amount of people listening. So what does your shirt say? What does your shirt say? Tell
my
people
shirt
so
says "Humankind be both," and concept that I put together freaking 7 years ago, I think, and I have made so many of these shirts for the world that I just freaking love it. And it's true. Be both human and kind. The possibility exists, people.
That's good to know. That's encouraging right there.
Yeah. So like Joel said, we are now uploading these to YouTube. People are starting to find those. So that's good and fun. Subscribe on there because that's valuable. Subscribe on this podcast feed that you're almost certainly listening to, because it's about 10,000 to 1 in the listens to views, but we'd like to get that up. And leave some reviews as well. Cool. Joel, beautiful, man. Appreciate you so much.
Awesome. You too. All right, man.
Yeah, that was a very enjoyable conversation for me.
That's cool. Yeah, what a trip, man.
Any thoughts for the future?
I don't know. I got to think about that. I'm not sure. Yeah. Do you have a sense of where you want to take it?
I don't know if I sent this over to you, and I've talked about this so much, but man, every time we're into something, this concept of free will just seems like it keeps popping up, right? And it's just this idea that when we're born just matters so much about our lifespan. What our personality type just matters so much about the choices we make. And there are all of these concepts, and I've had this conversation a couple times, but it's been like 5 to 10 minutes because people are really terrified of the concept of free will, I feel like. So someday I'd like to dive in for an hour on free will with you, because I think there's so much value in.
Let's do it.
Okay,
yeah.
let's do that
next.
Okay, let's do that next. Free will coming up. Heck yes.
Yeah.
All right, man.
I like that.
Cool. Then I'm beyond excited.
That's rad. Yeah, I can't wait. I can't wait to see what happens.
Well, heck yeah. I'll connect with you soon. Thank you.
Cool, man. Yeah, Patrick, it's good.
Enjoy the heck out of the rest of the day.
Heck yeah, man. You too.
Thanks, man. Talk to you soon.
All right. Yeah,
See ya.
bye.